You are a professor of economics,
here at George Mason University, where we are sitting right now.
so you know a lot about money?
No. Economics is not much about money, actually.
Okay,
There's
interesting.
monetary economics is one part of economics, but most economists don't specialize in monetary economics, and it's not really that important to us.
So what economics actually is?
It's about society. It's about people interacting. Now, we often look at markets as one of the first things economists really specialized in. And markets are where people trade things, and we often trade using money. But when we're interested in trade, we're not interested in the money itself. We're interested in the trade.
So you are studying the trades that people do.
That's where economics came from, in some sense, where it's first place
Where
we started
the
thinking about it.
first term in economics, what time was appeared in this world?
3 or 4 centuries ago. It had to do initially with sort of trade-offs you might make in a household or business, how big to make the bedroom,
So
how much
before
food.
3-4 centuries, the people were not
Well,
trading.
they weren't naming it that. Of course, people were thinking about society, and sometimes they thought about trade, and sometimes they thought about how to organize business and households. But it became more of a specialty when, in general, when a bunch of people talk about the same thing together and they give themselves a name, that's how a discipline's formed, and that's how economics formed. So we started talking about trade, but since then we've sort of talked about everything. So now economists take on almost any social phenomena is fair game for economics.
I think economics is one of the most complicated topic in this world right now. I don't know if anybody, a single human, really understands everything about economics. There is
Well, literally,
and that's why I'm here,
Okay.
for you to teach.
Look, every part of the world is really complicated. Like mountains are complicated, tigers are complicated. Everything's complicated. The question is really, how much do you care about the complexity? So economics is about society, about us interacting. We care a lot about that. And so we care a lot about the complexities that there are in economics. That's why it feels complicated, because there are all these things you care about. Now, at a first cut, people sort of tell themselves they understand society and social behavior, and then there's nothing to know about economics because there's nothing to learn, because social stuff is obvious. And then at a certain point you realize, oh, it's not obvious. I don't know how this stuff works. And then it opens up to you as something complicated that you might want to learn about once you realize you don't know. But it takes that first observation to realize that you don't know.
So what is really about, like, when you say that you know about economics, what do you really know?
I know about thinking about how people interact. So people do some things just in their own head, say by themselves in a room. And we have some things to say about that, but we'd have less to say about that. And when people start interacting with each other, now we've got more to say, because we've specialized in thinking about what happens when people interact. So one part of our package is game theory. Game theory is about, well, if 2 people were in some sort of situation, or 10 or 1,000 people, and they each knew something and they had some choices and they were just thinking about what the other people might do and strategically trying to make their own choices to get their best outcome. Game theory describes that sort of a situation.
Do you know a lot about game theory?
I know enough.
Okay.
Okay, but so it describes games, of course. You're playing chess or something else. But most of chess isn't about game theory.
To hook people how to play longer, and they use this game theory in applications to manipulate us to play longer.
More fundamentally, is we're just trying to see the world as games. So we're seeing like you on a job, trying to get hired, trying to like get promoted, but not work too hard. We see that as a game. And once we see it as a game, we can say, well, what sort of strategies might you use in that game? And then there's the other side of the game. There's the employer or a competing employer. They're each playing the same game, right, with you. And once we see it as a game, we can try to say, okay, what are the actions you can take here? What are the things you know and the things you don't know? What are the things you're trying to get? And we describe it all as a game. And now we say, what's the equilibrium of this game? I.e., how would people play this game? Because when you're playing chess, you say, what are they going to do, right? Part of your playing chess is figuring out what they're likely to do And then you're reacting to that. So in the employment game, we're saying, well, what would the employer do? What kind of tricks would they play? And then you're trying to anticipate those tricks and respond to them. And now we can understand this as a game, and we can analyze lots of the world in this way. But the key things we need to know in order to analyze something as a game is, what are your options? Like, what are the actions you can take at various spots? You can quit your job. You can like slack off. You can monitor, right? Those are things you could do. Then there's what do you know? Like, or what can you choose to know, right? Like, can you watch your employees, see what they're doing, give them a test, ask somebody else what they think of them, right? Those are some options. And then there's, what do you want? And once we know what people want and what they can do and what they know, we can set up a game which represents the situation, like getting a job, and then we can figure out what happens.
So one of the most important things is to understand what people want.
Exactly. If you don't know what people want, you can't figure out how they'll play the games.
What's their goal in the game?
Exactly.
My goal is to get the more kills in Call of Duty.
It might be in a war game, yes. But in a job game, we might say, well...
In a job game, you mean in your actual job.
Right, yes. So the employer, so we might know what the employer is trying to do. The employer is trying to pay you the least and get the most work out of you.
Yes.
And have you make the fewest mistakes and mess up other things, right?
And unless he understands the long-term value.
Well, that's those are the things he wants in the long run. But like, in order to get those in the long run, he may have to anticipate what you want in the shorter term in order to get you to stay on the job and learn the job, so that in the long run, you will do what they want.
So economics is a lot more about motivations and understanding.
Well, it's one of the main three things you need. I mean, game theory just has these three parts, right? There's what can you do, there's what do you know, and there's what do you want. You need those three things to figure out how people will play a game.
What can you do? Can you elaborate on that? Like, what are your options? What are your abilities? Can you kill people on the war game? Can you...
Right. So if we think about a subsistence society centuries ago, which is easier to think about, right? There you are. You could farm, you could fish, you could log, you could die, you could steal. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of your main options, right? You could have your own farm. You could work for somebody else's farm.
You can't go and play racing with cars because there is
right, but
it's not that.
You could just run a bit until you fell down hungry and. But if you're going to try to survive in this world, you have a limited range of options, right?
Yes.
Either you make the food, somebody else makes the food.
Always you have limited.
Always, right. And so in a subsistence farming world, you have these limited range of things that can be done. Each person could do any of these things. And then there's what do you know? So for example, would I be good running a farm, or would I be better hiring out somebody else's farm, right? If I try to buy my own farm, will I go out of business and like be worse off, or will I make a success of it? If this employee says that they know farming really well, should I pay them a lot, or are they lying?
So in a game of football, let's say, we limit the people to not be allowed to touch the ball with hands.
Right.
So that kind of makes the game more interesting because we limit their options.
So in all games, in some sense, we have these three elements in football, say, or soccer as we call it here, right? So there's what you're allowed to do, right? You're allowed to kick the ball. You're not allowed to touch the ball. It has to stay within the borders, right? And then there's what do you want? Well, you want to make goals. You want to win the game. And then there's what do you know? Well, what do you know is like, am I going to kick the ball left or right? Do you know? I know, right? So you're trying to guess what their plan is.
Wait, we said what's the motivation, what you want, what are your options, and what's the thirst?
What do you know? Right. So in soccer,
what is the difference with what you know and what are your options?
So when I'm running down the field with the ball, right? There's a guy coming at me. I want to get past him. How do I get past him? Right. Well, I'm going to kick the ball left or right. I'm going to go left or right. Now, if he knows if I'm going left or right, that won't help. The key thing is he doesn't know whether I'm going left or right. So I feint left and go right. I might trick him to go left and go around on his right. So the fact he didn't know which way I was going to go, what my plan was important to me being able to achieve this plan.
So this example that you're showing, you're saying is telling your options. Like this is...
But it's based on what people know, right? So say we've got some strategy here, right? And then there's a spy in our locker room, right?
What people?
If our
Now I understood. Now
if they have a
understood.
spy in our locker room who knows all our plans, and then every
Yes.
time we do something, they're right on it, then we're going to lose,
What
right?
you know, because the opponent might not know your strategy that
Exactly.
you need to play, and that's what makes the game interesting, because the other person does.
Right.
Now,
And so all the
now
way-
it clicks.
Right. So, but also in other games, like, so your employer, right? You start on a job and you think, I hope to work my way up on this job to becoming a higher person. So I'm going to work extra hard to impress them and make them think I'm valuable so that they will promote me. And what they're not telling me is this job is going to end in a year, and the whole office
Yes.
is going to close, and the whole product line is going to close,
Yes.
and everything's going to close, and they're not going to tell me that. And so if I don't know that, I'm going to put all this extra effort into
Yes.
impressing them, and that's going to be a waste, right?
And what they might not know is that I'm actually using this job to get another job, and
Right,
like
exactly.
get this experience for 1 year, and I will
Right.
leave. And it's like
Right,
that's
so-
why it makes it interesting, the game of
Right.
life.
Right.
Woohoo!
So you don't know things, right? And you also just don't even know how good you are at something, right? You try a career, might be
Yes.
podcasting or something, and you don't know if you're good. And that's the thing you don't know, and you're trying to find out through
This is
doing
a
some
real
trials.
problem. Exactly. I'm not sure if I'm good.
Right, and the way
Trying
you-
to find out.
The way you do is to try it, right? But that's, again, something you don't know. And that's part of the calculation. If you just knew what you were good at, well, life would be simpler, right? You just do the thing you're good at,
Yes.
and that would be that.
And if everyone knew the data, it was going to be a lot more boring. If I knew what everything, like the
Right.
unknown is what makes it interesting. So when I was watching your talks, you talked about one thing that I really want to understand. So Elon Musk said that now he's building robots because the bottleneck in the economy is humans, that we don't have enough humans.
Yeah,
And you
it's true.
talked about that 10 years ago.
Lots of people have talked about it for a long time.
So I want you to, what does he mean? And like, what is this? And what is this economy that will become in the future if we perhaps?
So the word economy is just the name for everything on Earth. So it's just all the things that contribute to what we buy and sell and do, right? We call that the economy. And one key fact about the world economy is it's been growing for a long time. It's been getting bigger. That is, we can do more now. And in fact,
Bigger in what way? Like
well, the key thing is we can get more of what we want. So this is the way economists look at from anyone's point of view in an economy. The question is, how much of what I want can I get? And we call that your wealth. Your wealth is your ability to get what you want. If you're rich, you can get a lot more of what you want. If you're poor, you can't.
So your wealth might be involved in your fame as well.
If you want to be
because
famous and you can be famous, then you're rich. Yes.
When you are famous, it gives you a lot more of what you own. You can talk with
Right.
other people. So
Right.
that's in your wealth.
Right. So it might be that being famous is what you want, or it might be that being famous helps you get what you want. Right.
Yes.
There might be other things you want, and fame is just the stepping stone to get to it. But either way, you're rich if you have a lot.
Oh my God, I love
what
this.
you
Will
want.
be so exciting.
Right. So as the economy gets bigger, we all get richer in the sense that we can all get more of what we want. And that's an interesting fact about the world. It wasn't true a
And
long
now
time
that
ago.
one person can get more of what he wants than the emperor 300 years
Right.
ago.
We are
So he's
in
wealthier.
many ways richer than even sovereigns from a long time ago, right? In some ways. Now, if we talk about how many people are staring at us and saying how great we are, maybe we're not so rich. But if we're talking about food or machines or, how fast we can get somewhere, we're rich, right? So that's the economy. Now, if you say this economic growth, it's been doubling every 15 years for the last century or so. That's just pretty fast. The world economy has been doubling.
The economic, you mean when you talk about we get more of what we want.
Right.
This
So
is what you mean.
basically-
economic growth. No
exactly.
money, no nothing.
Right. Now, money is a way to track our ability to get what we want because, of course, we often use money to get what we want. And so it's relevant, but the money
One
itself,
metric.
right, it's just helping us see that we can get more of what we want. It's not the thing we want. Money is just a means to get the thing we want. So, but we can get more of what we want. And that's been going on for a while. That is every 15 years, on average, everybody gets twice as much of what they want.
Wow.
Because getting that rich
And
faster.
I'm curious to see the acceleration of this thing.
It's been
The same.
steady for a century or so, but then there was this thing that called the Industrial Revolution, and it was much slower before that. So
Slower. before.
growth was slower before.
So
This
the Industrial Revolution, all the machines, stuff.
Right, everything sped up. So for like,
And what about the last 20 years?
so for say for 10,000 years, the economy doubled every 1,000 years. So it took 1,000 years for it to be able to do twice as much stuff, and then we sped up with the industrial.
It took 1,000
It took 1,000 years.
years.
For the last 10,000 years. It took 1,000 years each time to double.
Oh my God.
And now it only takes 15 years. So that's a lot faster.
A lot faster.
And there was a farming revolution about 10,000 years ago. And before that, it took 250,000 years to double. So we have been speeding up. We have been speeding up.
How do we know this? Because this is a bold statement to say.
The main thing is, until recently, everybody was poor. Basically about as poor as you could be. So that meant the main way the world was able to make more of stuff was just by having more people. That is, twice as many people getting what they want, or the same sort of thing, is a twice as big economy.
Yes.
And so until recently, we can just track the number of people. We can count skulls like buried in the ground. We can see how big the population used to be, and we can see how fast it grew. And so until the farming revolution, the population doubled.
So growth of the population
was the main way the economy grew until recently. Because until recently, everybody was poor.
When population grows means that economic growth as well.
Because we're basically adding up for each person how much of what they want that they get, and adding it up across all the people. So the more people there are, the more stuff people are getting what they want.
But there might be a lot of people and they don't get what they want. But
there's a certain minimum level. That is, if you're below a certain poor, you die. That's called subsistence. That is, the minimum level of poverty that you can still say and be alive is called the subsistence level.
Okay.
You and I aren't living at the subsistence level, thankfully. We're well above it. But through most of history, most people lived at the subsistence level. They were about as poor as they could be without dying.
So that's why you can track with people and you get the average.
Right, because until recently, everybody was just about as poor as they could be. And then we counted how many people were there. And then the last few hundred years, we've been getting rich per person. And now how rich each person is has mattered. But that didn't matter before.
So do we know anything before the 200? You said before 10,000 years, we were getting every 1,000 years.
For the last 10,000 years, roughly doubling
1,000.
every 1,000 years. And then before that, doubling every 250,000 years.
Yes. Do we know anything before?
Well, before that was before humans. And then we can start to think about all the other animals, right?
250,000. Yeah.
So roughly like a
So
couple
can
million.
we say the animals are getting wealthier?
Well, we could say animals are at subsistence, and we could talk about how many animals there were in the world, but now we'll have to try to judge the
maybe
different animals.
Dogs are a bit wealthier than...
I'm not sure the concepts work so well there. Once we're sticking with humans, at least we have things to compare to, so that's roughly what we tend to do. So once we have humans, we can talk about how many of them there are and how happier they are. When we're looking at other animals, it's kind of harder to compare.
Okay.
And so we haven't specialized in that.
Okay, let's go back to, last 100 years is been doubling every 15 years. But now?
And it's still doubling every 15 years. It hasn't sped up lately.
Hasn't sped up.
Has not sped up. So
not even with the power of the internet.
So every 15 years, the world economy doubles. And so a lot of new things have to show up. And whenever new things show up, some people say, wow, we've never had that before. And they go, the world must be changing. And of course it is. But it's not accelerating, right? There's a difference between change and acceleration. We couldn't double every 15 years if we weren't changing a lot. That is, pretty much on average, every industry has to be getting twice as good at what it does. So a lot of changes are happening all the time. But the growth rate has stayed steady at every 15 years. So now we get back to the Elon Musk story. It's like, well, could we grow faster? What's the limit? And so if you look at like a factory, you say, here's a factory, it makes a certain kind of things. We could compare how much stuff comes out of the factory every month, say, to how valuable the factory itself is. Like, how much wealth would it take to make a factory like that? And it turns out for most factories, they pump as much stuff out every month as they're worth.
As they are?
As the value of the factory itself.
What does that mean?
How much it costs to make the factory. So it costs something to make a factory.
Okay.
And then in the factory, you can make stuff.
And it costs about a month?
A month's worth of output of the factory, or a couple months worth of output of the factory to make a factory.
Okay.
So if you could make factories in factories.
If you could make factories in factories.
Right. Then the economy could double every few months, right? Because you'd have the factory pumping out factories.
Like what Elon Musk is doing, a factory built in Tesla.
Right. But it's building some things.
And it's building Teslas and whatever robots that can produce stuff by themselves.
So if you look in a factory, most of the stuff in the factory.
It's a bit confusing.
Okay, but just go into a factory, look around. You say, what do you see? Well, you see girders, you see machines, you see chairs, you see, assembly, you see, pulleys going along, conveyor belts.
Now I
all
understand.
those things can be made in factories.
If one factory is producing another factory with everything inside, then the economy will be double every few months. This is what you're saying.
Right? If a factory could make everything you needed in a factory, then the economy could double every few months, which is much faster.
But do we need everything that is produced in a factory?
Well, so if you go to a factory and you say, I want another factory. Like, this is a great factory. How do I get another one like this? Well, you look at what's in it. We could say, well, there's machines, there's conveyor belts, there's lights. And each one of those things is made in a factory, right? So you could say, well, let's go get a factory to make those things, and then we'll have another factory.
Can we give an example with a YouTube channel, which is more simple? Let's say, I'm producing videos. So can we give this example so it's more understanding for me?
Well, so we could say, what does it take to make another video output, right? It takes these cameras, it takes a room, and it takes you.
Yes.
Right. Now, factories can make this other stuff really fast, but they can't make you very fast. That's the problem.
But let's say they could.
If they could, now, then we could make things that duplicate you much faster.
Yes, but is there a need for this in the world? Like, because we can make another 100 me, and 100 of these things as well, microphones and a team as well. Let's say we have 100. Is that going to, the market will not need that probably?
Well, so if we just go out in the world and look at something that we do need, like take a factory that's actually selling stuff, right? If you go to a factory and it's making stuff that nobody wants, it's not going to last very long, right? They're going to go out of business. But if you actually look at the factories that are actually out there, well, the reason they're actually out there is they're making something somebody wants.
Okay.
Right? So if you were an ambitious businessman, you might think, gee, this is a factory making stuff people want. If I could make another factory like it, I could sell more of it and I could get rich, right?
Okay.
So if all those business people are out there thinking, how could I make more factories?
So it was going, let's say in my example with the YouTube channel, we're going to produce another YouTube team. And they're not going to be making entertainment. They're going to making educational, different
whatever
things.
anybody's willing to pay for.
Yes.
Yeah. But the idea is like the economy has all these different parts, right? There's car factories, there's video teams, there's restaurants, right? And for the economy to get bigger, all those parts have to get bigger, right? The restaurants have to be able to do more, video teams have to be able to do more, car factories have to be able to do more. That's how the economy grows. And so if we think, how could we make the economy grow faster? We look at how it grows now. How does it grow now? Well, it grows now. One way it grows now is by making more of whatever we have, right? More car factories, more restaurants, more video teams.
And we want to accelerate this, that happens to 15 years in few months. Do we want this?
Well, it's not so much whether we want it, but any one business person wants their part to grow faster because they can make more money that way, right?
So it's inevitable.
Well, it's the net effect of all the local choices. That is, say there's a restaurant industry and I could make another restaurant and I could sell it and make a lot of money from selling the restaurant. Well, then I want to do that, right? And I'm trying to look for how to make more restaurants to sell and then how to do that fast, right? And cheap. So everybody in the economy and all the different parts, they're all trying to ask, how can I do my part cheaper? How can I be more efficient about my part? Because then I could sell more of my part and I could get rich.
So Elon Musk is trying to become more rich in this way.
So Elon Musk says, how can I make more cars? How can I make cheaper cars? How can I make better cars?
Or how can I make a factory that makes cars? Or how can I
start
make
a new company?
A robot that have 100 different uses. So
So if you think about all these different things in the economy and making them more, one of the hardest things to make bigger is people. That is, to make a restaurant or a factory, you need people, and it's hard to make more of those fast.
Yes, very, very, very interesting. So, okay, if I want to produce factories, I will produce 100 teams of like me. But now we are going to need another 100 people. But with the AI, ba-bam.
Right. So the key thing to notice is today we can make stuff in factories fast, but we can't grow the economy as fast as we can make stuff in factories because we can't make people fast. But if you could have AI substitute for people and then you can make the AIs in factories, now all of a sudden everything can grow faster because you can make them in factories, right? So in our economy today, human population growth is a substantial limit on how fast we can grow. In fact, the main way we grow the economy today is by making things better. That is, making a better restaurant or a better battery, etc. Innovation is the main driver of growth today. It's not sort of making factories in factories because that's too hard because we can't make the people fast.
But it seems that it's coming.
Eventually, we should be able to make substitutes for people in factories, and that'll make a huge difference, and the economy will be able to grow much faster, maybe double every month or even faster.
I was having so much fun watching your TED Talks that you were doing 10 years ago, and you were predicting the future, which was very
distant future, not today.
Yes, the distant future. And it was very interesting because you made some mistakes in your predictions. You made you thought that we are going to replicate humans. You put a lot of value on humans with your predictions.
So if we think about something that substitutes for people, that's a machine, right? An artificial substitute for a human. There's different ways to make that. My book, which you were probably talking about, The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life, When Robots Rule the Earth, is about a certain way to make an artificial human called a brain emulation. That hasn't happened yet, but I didn't predict it would happen yet. We have been in the news developing other kinds of artificial intelligence, and they are advancing, but they aren't yet to the point where they can substitute for humans. So we're still a long way away from the point.
Basically, you are presenting that we are going to scan the brain and make more humans.
So in order to make an artificial human, like an AI, a machine that acts like a human, we need the hardware and then we need the software. We need how is it organized, right? So there are many ways to make the software. One is just to sit down and write software. Another is to try to do machine learning, like what people are doing today. They have a learning algorithm and a big data set and they try to learn the software. But a third approach is just to take the software that's right now in human brains and just move it over to an artificial machine. So that's the concept of a brain emulation. And that was the focus of my book, The Age of M. And I'd say we still don't know which of these approaches will be first because they're still a long way away.
That's interesting. But it seems now that AGI is the path that we see that becomes more alive, and AGI is
it's in the news. That's what you see.
It's in the news.
Okay, the question is which will get there first, right? But it's all a long way away. So if people are telling you that we're almost there, that it's just a couple of years and then these machines are going to be doing all the jobs, I think they're wrong. We're not that close. We're still a long way away.
Okay, so what is your predictions like? What do you think, and how do you see actually all this stuff?
So
like,
let's take some history. So in 1984, I was 25 years old, and I had just read a lot of stuff about AI at the time. In the news then was about how AI was revolutionizing things and how it was jumping by leaps and bounds, and it was going to tear through the economy and change everything. I read about that in 1984, and I was seduced. And so I left school and went off to Silicon Valley to try to get involved in artificial intelligence. And I
seduced.
I did, in fact, succeed at that, in the sense that I took a job at a research lab at Lockheed, and within a year, I was at their artificial intelligence research lab doing artificial intelligence research in 85. That was because there was a burst of new machines and new demos that were very impressive. Like, machines could do stuff they had never done before. Now, it turns out that's happened every few decades for a long time. Like in the 1960s, there were people who were really impressed by the new electronic computers and all the things they could do. And in fact, there were presidential commissions about how these machine computers might take over all the jobs soon. And it was all in the news in the 1960s. And then in the 1930s, I don't know if you remember the movie Metropolis or other sorts of things. There was a lot of people discussing in the 1930s how machines were going to replace humans soon. And actually in the 1830s, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, people were all agitated about, look how these machines can replace humans. What if the machines could replace all the humans? So 1830s, 1930s, 1960s, 1980s, and 90s, again, in the last decade or so, every few decades, we have people very concerned that machines are about to take over all the jobs.
And what do you think?
So I just think when we see a new impressive demo that's much better than previous demos, we are just very bad at judging how close that is to being able to take over all the jobs.
Yes.
We're just really impressed with it, and we just don't know that distance. There's a distance there, because fundamentally when we look inside ourselves, we see simplicity. We don't see complexity inside ourselves when we introspect. What
does that mean when we...
Well, so when you, like, if I say, how did you set up the lights there? You said, oh, it wasn't very hard. I did this and I did that, right? And it seems simple to you, but in fact, it isn't. And the way we learn how hard it is to do the things people do is when we try to make a machine to do what a human does. That's when you realize how really hard it is. Okay. Otherwise, it feels really easy. So AI researchers for a very long time have noticed just how hard it is to get a machine to do things that people do, because they try and fail. It's just really hard.
To even walk is difficult.
To do even simple things is really hard. And people have seen that for a long time. So the researchers for a long time, they struggle and they fail and they struggle. And then they have a burst of success. Ooh, look. We were able to do something we couldn't do before.
But this is logical, because you said every 15 years, it's reasonable to double the economy. So it's not like something...
Right.
The biggest breakthrough that will change everything.
Right. So the key thing is, when you see a breakthrough, is that just part of how the economy doubles every 15 years? As we just keep having breakthroughs? Or is this the big breakthrough that's about to mean the machines take over everything?
The singularity.
So, however you want to call it, that's the thing that's been in people's heads since 1830, right? They look at these machines doing new stuff and they go, are they about to do everything?
But you don't see a snowball effect. You don't see things.
What we see is the snowball effect of doubling every 15 years. That's the snowball effect. It is a snowball effect.
That's it. End of story.
Well, there may eventually be another snowball effect, but now the question is, what would it look like? How often does that happen? So remember the past. Remember, there have been these periods of steady growth, and then all of a sudden, boom, a really faster growth, right? So
it happened before.
So remember.
From the doubling.
The doubling
years,
changes.
2.5.
So for example,
250.
Animal brains doubled every 30 million years, and then humans doubled every 250,000 years. That's a factor of 120. And then humans doubled every 250,000 years, and then they started doubling every 1,000 years. That's a factor of 250. And then from 1,000 years, they doubled every 15 years. That's a factor of 60.
Yeah,
so huge factors in growth have happened 3 times before, at
and
least.
what was the reasons? The reasons was the agriculture revolution.
The introduction of humans, agriculture, and industry. Now, we could go into what exactly caused those things.
The introduction of humans.
Whatever made humans different from other animals, that allowed humans to grow faster. Then whatever made farming different from foraging, that allowed humans to grow faster again. And then whatever makes industry faster than farming, that allowed humans to grow yet again faster. So it's plausible that we could find yet another thing that would suddenly make the economy grow faster.
So we might, because it seems now that is the stuff that are accelerating,
Right. Yeah.
We might see a 7-year doubling in the next
so remember the factors, like what were they? They were 120, 250, 60. Those are the increases we saw before. So
250, 1,000.
Well, but we're looking at the ratios, right?
And 15.
The ratios, like doubling every 30 million years to every 250,000 years, that's a factor of 120. Then doubling
a factor of 120. What do you mean? Like
by the rate at which the growth rate sped up.
Okay.
Right. The doubling time fell by that factor.
Okay.
Right. So the growth rate sped up by that factor. So the factors were 120, 250, 60. Those are the 3 factors so far. And then we go further, there's some other factors, right? So if that's the kind of factor you're looking at, then that's the kind of factor to expect in the future if you see it again, right? Somewhere between 60 and 250. Not a factor of 2. You said it might go from 15 to 7. That's a factor of 2.
Okay.
I mean, right? And we're looking at much bigger factors here, right?
Oh, we're talking about every month to be.
Yeah, so every month is
so
a factor.
What factor is
So every month would be 15 times 12, right?
So what factor? 15 times 12.
Right, so like roughly 200 or something.
Okay, so it's the similar.
Or 150 sort of thing, right?
Crazy.
Okay, so that's why roughly a month would also be plausible just by this history, right? This history suggests the new thing would double every month. And that's also what's suggested by the fact of you can pump it out in factories, right? Because right now, factories pump out their own value every month. So those 2 numbers are about the same, confirming that's roughly what you might think would happen eventually. But now notice this huge jump that's happened has only ever happened 3 times in all known human history, right? So don't expect it to happen every month.
Might be unlikely to happen in the next 1 year.
Right. So most changes aren't this, right?
Yes.
So every time you read about a new cool thing in the newspaper or whatever, that's great, but it's going to be part of the usual trajectory,
but
right?
You think artificial intelligence seems to us now that it's that thing?
Something eventually will cause this big jump, right? The question is what
and it might
how.
Be the factories producing factories.
Well, but the question is, how can factories produce factories? They need some sort of artificial
in the
intelligence.
history, like the Industrial Revolution, this is what happened. Factories were producing factories, right?
Well, they had human help, remember. So humans with machines helped make other machines in the Industrial Revolution, right? But that was new before we didn't have as many machines. So again, there's this key question: what changed with the Industrial Revolution? What changed with the Farming Revolution? What changed with the Human Revolution? We can go into any of those if you want, but the key point is another change might be coming of that sort of magnitude.
This is so interesting.
Okay. So now the game is going to be say, okay, there might be another change this big. So let's just go over the stats again, right? So during each of these eras, we have roughly how many doublings? Like roughly between, say, 8 or 20 doublings, say, in each of these eras. So that gives us a rough guess about when this next transition might happen. It would happen after our current era goes, say, through 8 or 20 doublings, something in that range.
How many we went from the Industrial Revolution? 5? No, 10?
I mean, it's in the ballpark that it could happen now or it could take another century. That's roughly in the ballpark, right? So the timing is rough.
But how many doublings?
So again, if it happens every 15 years, then in 150 years, that's 10 doublings.
So, you said between 8 to 20.
Right, roughly. So the point is, we can't tell you exactly when it's going to happen. It could happen now. It could happen in a century or 2 centuries, somewhere in that rough.
Hopefully in my lifetime.
Hopefully, but maybe not. Okay. Then there's the next thing we can say is how big would the new growth rate is? And then we said that's roughly a month. And we might say, how fast is the transition? So in the past, the transitions were always less than a previous doubling time. Okay. The farming revolution took a lot less than 250,000 years. The industrial revolution took a lot less than 1,000 years. So that means the next transition would take a lot less than 15 years. So that's roughly how fast you'd expect it to happen, maybe on a 5-year period. Okay. So you're looking for.
What do you mean on a 5-year period?
Well, that's the time duration from when things look like ordinary till all of a sudden they're in this completely strange world, right? Where it's growing every month. That's the duration of the change, how long it would take to make the change.
Confused.
So I mean, we're just trying to use past stats to try to guess things about the future one, okay?
So, but now that you said that, I'm kind of blown away, because if we are talking a double in every month in the next one, then we are going to have the next one might be a double in every day,
and it would happen within,
not every day, every minute,
and the next one would happen within a year or two after that first one.
And that one will happen after seconds, maybe.
So it can't go on forever, right? So clearly, this trend can't go on forever. That's just not possible, because there's physical limits to how fast things can grow.
What are the physical limits?
Well, if stuff's made out of atoms, then atoms can only move so fast. And, you're going to try to double atoms. They have to move around and rearrange each other. And they have a time limit on how fast they can do that. And of course, they need energy.
In the space and time, you're talking about space and time.
Yeah, so I have a physics background. There are real physical limits, but still, if you've seen something happen, say 3 or 4 times so far, it's reasonable to guess it might happen 1 more time. Don't tell me it might happen 40 more times. That's a little stretching out of the data. But if we say it's happened 4 times, I'm going to say probably 1 more time. Okay. Maybe 2 more times, maybe 3, but at least 1, okay?
Wow.
So, and the 1 is the one we're going to care most about, because it's coming up soon, right? It's the one we'd be facing, right? The 1 next change. Okay, so there's different ways to go at this. One is we could list candidates. What plausible candidates could there be that could cause this, right? And another thing we could look at is what caused the past ones. Maybe the future one would be like the past ones. And the more closer we could figure out the past ones, the more we could guess the future ones. So my book, The Age of M, as I discussed it, is a candidate for that explanation of the next transition, right? It's a kind of artificial intelligence. And it's one we can actually do a lot of analysis of to say what that world looks like. So if you call it the singularity, which some people do, then some people have this attitude toward it that there's just no way to know what would happen afterward. It's just this horizon of visibility, like it's over the horizon. You just can't see that, right?
Yes.
And they just want to talk about when it might happen and not say anything about what. That seems too pessimistic. You should try to figure out what it might be and try to guess as best you can what's likely to happen. So that's what I try to do in my book, The Age of M. I'm working out one scenario of what it might be like. So obviously, according to many people, quite plausibly, the most plausible cause of this next transition would be some form of artificial intelligence. It doesn't have to be, but that's a very plausible story, right? It would have to be a form of artificial intelligence that was different than what we've seen so far, right? We've had computers for 70 years. They're integrated into the economy. We keep making advances in the hardware and software in many different ways, and none of those advances so far have caused this sort of a big change, right? Now, one thing that could happen is just as machines do a larger percentage of things in the economy would in fact start to speed up. That is, this fact that you can't make people very fast would become less of a limitation because people would be doing less. So one form of prediction is just if we just keep improving computers the way we have been doing for 70 years, eventually the economy will speed up, and then eventually, boom, just by the fact that we'll just slowly having humans do less and less. That's a different kind of scenario than that we have some great insight, some key technology that suddenly lets us do a lot more AI fast, right? That's the sort of thing some people are hoping for with the phrase AGI. Or recent developments, people say...
You are making fun of me, huh?
No. A lot of people say this. But basically, you have to just realize we've been making advances so far for a long time, right? And we could just keep making more advances at the same rate we've made past advances. And eventually that would produce this outcome of this boom. But it could be that we achieve some new innovation that's lumpier and faster than that. So now let me talk about lumpiness of innovations. This is a key idea. Growth so far has been mostly innovation, like we learn to do things better. But most innovation is lots of little things that accumulate slowly over time. Every once in a while, there might be a lumpy innovation, an innovation that just can't be broken into pieces. It sort of has to happen as a bigger chunk.
What can you give me one example that happened in the past as a lumpy innovation?
Well, we could say the Industrial Revolution was lumpy compared to prior innovations, right? Previously people had machines. They were slowly improving them, but it was really slow. And then in some sense, industry was a set of related things that could all help each other out, right? Industry was more lumpy than previous innovations, if you like. You might think, say, the nuclear bomb or something was a lumpy innovation, but it's not quite as lumpy as people think. But, that's an example of something you might think, you either have it or you don't, and you can't really have half of one. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a thing. So one scenario would be we
don't say YouTube is a lumpy innovation. Or maybe we say.
The question is how big an advance was it over prior versions,
over
right?
Prior versions.
Right? We might say YouTube wasn't that big an advance over previous video services, right? The microphones we're using, those are slowly improving over time, mm-hmm. right? The cameras are slowly improving, right? So mostly the cameras are improving through lots of little innovations, right? There isn't a sudden big camera innovation where we have vastly better cameras. So, that's why positing a big lumpy innovation is a bit unlikely in the sense that we rarely see them. So you might ask, well, these big changes in the past, what caused them? Those were kind of lumpy innovations, right? Whatever caused the Industrial Revolution, whatever caused the farming revolution, whatever caused the human innovation, in some sense, there was a lump there, something that, it made a big difference, just one thing. Somehow one thing made a big difference those 3 times.
And what was that? You discussed this a bit. What was that thing? The Industrial Revolution, what was that single
thing? What was the
thing?
cause? Well, I think it's easier to explain the first 2 and then we'll do the last one. So if we say, what was the human?
And then we're going to get into what you think and singularity.
Right. So the first one in this history was humans at all. How were humans different? So our standard story about how humans were different was culture. That is, other animals, in order to innovate, they had to have the innovations embodied in their genes. Whereas culture allowed innovations to spread across communities without being embodied in the genes. So humans had a way that I could watch what you were doing and copy what you were doing. And then somebody could watch what I was doing, copy that. And that could spread through our community. And that wasn't in my genes. My genes express this ability to watch you and copy. But once we have this ability to watch and copy, then we can spread innovation. So that culture was the key thing for humans. That's what allowed humans to grow faster, was having culture. Language added to culture, but more fundamentally, it's the ability to copy what other people are doing. And to distinguish what's worth copying, right? To look among the things they go and say, that's a pretty good thing. I want to do that one. So that was number 1. Culture allowed humans.
Culture copying.
Exactly. Number 2, farming. What was different about farming? Well, before farming, people were foragers. They lived in small groups and they wandered around and they didn't meet each other very often. And so innovations couldn't spread very fast because they just had to randomly hit the next group and slowly move around. Yes. With farming, people stayed in one place and then they had roads.
So when we were hunter-gatherers, they didn't meet with
each other very often.
Interesting.
And they didn't trade very much because they didn't have very much because they had to carry everything with them.
Interesting.
So once we had farming, we could stay in one place and then live a lot closer to each other. And then we had roads and trade such that we could move things across long distances fast. And that allowed innovations to spread fast. Innovations spread through war and trade across very long distance networks very fast. And
war is an important part.
War and trade. They both happened on the same roads, basically. or waterways. But basically, with farming, people were able to travel long distances and trade things across long distances and copy things across long distances fast. And so
so this copying idea, it's
yes. So
it's important to all the revolutions.
So innovation is invention plus diffusion, and diffusion's the main thing.
Now you talk very complicated stuff that I will never understand in my lifetime.
Innovation is people doing new stuff, right? Invention is the first time they do a new thing, and diffusion is the other times.
Okay.
So when we have movies where we celebrate inventors, like Alexander Graham Bell or something, right? We're celebrating the inventor, the guy who did it first. But if one guy only did it once first, it wouldn't make much of a difference. The reason it makes a big difference is because then lots of other people do it by copying.
Like Steve Jobs, we celebrate Steve Jobs.
Well, Steve Jobs invented something, but then he had this whole diffusion process by which we could all get what he made, right?
Yeah, and also other companies copying what he made.
Exactly. So that's why it spread, right?
Yeah.
So diffusion is actually the most important part of innovation, in the sense that it's changes in diffusion that makes the difference.
And now with the Industrial Revolution, maybe this is what changed. Faster information with books.
Right. So the question is
faster replication.
Right. So it does seem like the Industrial Revolution was a change in the rate of diffusion of innovation.
I love that this is the factor. I love that this is the biggest factor. This is very interesting of how easily it is to copy other people.
Right. So in the farming era, inventions diffused, but they diffused just through ordinary trade and war, not through networks of experts. But with the Industrial Revolution, what we had was the experts in each area, be it, making shoes or steel or farming, those experts would talk to other experts about their expert topic across long distances. And that hadn't really happened much before.
With books, with traveling.
With the scientific societies, with journals, with, meetings and travel, experts talk to each other across long distances. That allowed innovation to move much faster.
That was a bit still more difficult to do than now. It was send a letter, write a book, maybe go and give a talk to 1,000 people.
Right.
But now it's like...
But the growth rate hasn't changed. That is, the key thing was so experts to talk to each other. Once they could talk to each other fast enough, that was enough.
But we actually only had that for the last 10 years, the connectivity.
But starting 400 years ago, experts in Europe started to talk to each other through scientific societies. They had scientific journals and meetings, and then the experts in certain kind of farming would write up their results about how their farming experiment went. They'd put them in this journal that would spread. And starting even 400 years ago, scientific societies doubled every 15 years. It was one of the earliest things to start doubling every 15 years was the scientific societies, because they were the place where experts would spread innovations across long distances.
And you are sure that now the last 10 years is not accelerated?
We have not accelerated, no.
At all.
Right, sorry. But that's the key thing to know.
Sorry.
There's only ever been these three big things, right? There have been these three huge events, and then everything else in between was just part of the usual growth mode, right? Everything, even writing, right? You might think writing was huge, but writing did not change the rate at which the farming economy grew. Writing happened during the middle of the farming economy growth, right?
Yeah.
Writing was like 4,000 years ago.
It might seem big for us, but when you see the data, might not be.
So writing appeared like 4,000 years ago, roughly. And the
world...
It
might be a good fundamental block that you can build on.
Right. It might have been the key till the next stage after it.
The key, yeah. But
to allow it, but by itself, it wasn't enough. That is, you can't have scientific journals unless you have writing, but you had writing thousands of years before you had scientific journals. So writing by itself wasn't enough.
So, okay. So this happened, we explain what happened.
So we have these last three things, understanding what caused them. We had culture, diffusing innovation instead of through genes. We had long distance trading and travel networks, diffusing innovations for farming. Then we had expert communication networks, diffusing innovation for industry. And now the question is, what could happen next?
And this is what you're trying to answer in your book.
Well, I was postulating one hypothesis.
This is exactly what the singularity talks about. It's like, what is that next thing? Or is like something different, the singularity that they talk
singularity
about?
is just another name for the fact that there might be another speed up and how fast things happen. That's all. It's just a name for the idea things could speed up. Question is, okay, when might they speed up? How fast might they speed up? What could cause that?
Okay.
Then we have to go into all this analysis.
I'm sitting here and you direct me when you think things will speed up.
So, I just have the statistics of the past ones. And from the statistics, I get a rough guess. Like sometime in the next century or so, within, say, a 5 or 10 year period, it would go from currently doubling every 15 years to doubling every month. That's just from the statistics of previous ones.
What do you mean 5? So that you mean 5 to 10 years, the transition?
Yes, the transition.
From the
current mode
15
to the new mode.
years.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
And how do you know that is 5 to 10 years?
Just because it's always been within a previous doubling time.
The previous, okay,
right?
Okay.
So that tells you how fast the transition would take, right?
Wow, this is so beautiful that we take history and can predict the future. Actually, it's so sexy.
It's also it's mysterious in some sense that you would wish you had a deeper theory of these patterns, but what you have is the patterns, and you're trying to make guesses based on patterns you don't fully understand. But that's what you kind of have to do. So the other approach here is to have a theory of what could cause the next transition, right? And so the obvious thing to do is just make up some alternatives and explore each one and ask, well, if this was what causes it, how would that play out? So that's what I try to do in Age of M. I pick one possible explanation and I try to work through the details. But we can talk about other possible explanations.
Tell me what you think will happen in the future out of your experience.
So I'm more skeptical about the sudden AGI invention story, right? I think as computers get better and cheaper, we will slowly get better, but there won't be a sudden moment where, the lights turn on and it wakes up and says, aha, I am ruler of the universe. I mean, many people are imagining something like that and even imagining it now because we've had some recent dramatic progress. And so people say, aha, it's about to come right now. In the next few years, it's going to be the thing that takes over. But I'm more skeptical about that. I think we're just going to have incremental progress as we have. But eventually,
in the next 100 years,
if slowly that stuff just takes over a larger fraction of the economy, then we'd have the boom. So that's a trend we can track, right? So at the moment we ask, what percentage of the economy goes to computers? How much money, if we took a look at all the money people pay in the world, how much do they pay for computers and software? It's less than 5%. Okay. So that would have to grow to like 50%.
To phones and everything.
Everything, yeah, all of it. It's less than 5%.
Wow.
Okay. So it has a long way to grow. But it could grow. So, but that's a trend we could watch and track, right? So as that number goes from 5 to 7 to 10 to 15, 20 to 30, as that number goes up, we'd be saying, aha, and the economy would start to grow faster.
Can you tell me what is the percentages of the economy that take large portions? Like you said, 5% computers and software. And
right.
What are the big parts of the economy?
Well, for example, medicine takes up almost 20%. We spend about 20% in the United States of the economy on medicine. That's huge.
That's good, stupid, clever.
Well, it depends on how much value we're getting out of it. It seems to me where it's excessive, but hey, if you look at something like housing is probably even a bigger fraction of the economy. A third of the economy may be taken up with housing, at least in some places, because basically we've messed up the housing market and we're not building as much stuff as we should.
We're not building as much stuff.
Right. So it's been a common observation that we've just regulated the housing industry so strongly that we're just not building as much housing as we used to. And so housing prices are going up because housing is scarce. And so like in the high wage places like San Francisco or New York or even around here, wages are very high and housing prices are very high because there's just not enough housing. So it's a high number.
So 20%, around 20% in the United States, you said it's the medicine,
right?
That includes doctors, hospitals,
the whole thing,
all this stuff. And you said another about 30%.
Yeah, so this is easy stuff to look up. So I feel like we should pause and I should look it up if you want me to give you more authoritative numbers, because there's just standard. If you just look at GDP divided by percentages of industries, that's what we're talking about. Like, what are the various industries that, you know, take up what percentage of the economy. So
we're going to put a link for people to
right. But
see.
you know, it's a good thing to get your head around, like where's the most of the money go, right?
Yes.
Like food is another part of the economy, right? Like
Percentage.
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but basically most of these things are big, and computers are smaller than these things at the moment, right?
So when computers become bigger,
Big
what
percent.
happens?
Well, what happens is then that, you know, they can do more in factories, say, and so they make it easier for factories to make factories without humans' help, right? So remember, the problem was of making a factory make a factory is you need humans to help make the new factory. But the more things that happen in that process where humans
and
are
we
involved,
don't have enough humans. This is basically
so, yes, we don't have skilled humans able to do all these jobs. And so obviously one thing that we're going to be doing is to be taking people who are now poor, unskilled humans and make them skilled humans so that they can do more of these jobs. That's a way the economy has been growing for a long time.
And when it will reach for 50%, it will be an indication that this gets a big portion of our economy.
And the growth rate can be faster.
Therefore, it seems that can be the 5 to 10%, 5 to 10 years period of the transition.
We would be getting close then, because the economy right then would be growing faster. It might be growing twice as fast.
Can you give me what was the data of the portion of the economy that was happening in the Industrial Revolution? Like you say now, of computers.
Well, so for example, before the Industrial Revolution, most of the economy was farming. Farming was the overwhelmingly large fraction of the economy before the Industrial Revolution. And then what happened is industry grew and farming fell, right?
And now farming is very small.
Right, exactly. The farming itself is very small. Food is larger, but most of food isn't farming.
Yes.
But once upon a time, most of the economy was farming because that was what we needed to feed people.
And when the Industrial Revolution kicked in and got a big part of the economy.
Right. But the first thing the Industrial Revolution needed to do was make farming cheaper. That is, we couldn't put lots of people doing other things until farming got cheaper. So the first thing that had to happen is industry had to make farming more efficient.
With all the tools that they used.
The very first things were pretty simple things. So tractors came later, but there were simple things that made farming more efficient.
How do you get water?
Right, basically like clearing out the stones, like having more, smart ways of what you plant when, having better kinds of plows. Those made a big difference. And that making farming more efficient was what allowed more people to be doing other things. And then that allowed the Industrial Revolution to take off.
Okay. But we can't know what was the percentage of the economy before
basically, farming was like 80% of the economy.
No, I'm talking about the previous one with humans, the 250,000 years that was speeding.
When humans first showed up, there were primates, and then humans were better able to outcompete the other primates.
So we cannot put a percentage of that.
But they didn't really have a large economy to have percentages of, basically. In terms of, you could talk about how they spent their time and what different activities humans spent their time on. And, at some point humans started to make tools, right? And they were useful. They spent a certain percent of their time making tools, and they spent a certain percent of their time talking to each other, and a certain percent of the time, like, making clothes and making food and cooking. Like, one of the big innovations for initially humans was cooking, like fire. Humans managed fire, and then humans could use fire to cook food, and cooked food allowed our stomachs to get a lot smaller and devote our bodies to other things besides digesting food. So many other animals, like cows or whatever, they spend most of their body with big stomachs digesting food because, food's really important. But once you can cook food, now your body doesn't have to put as much effort into digesting it, and then your body can do other things.
Cool. Now that you explained this, go back and explain what you think the future holds.
So I would say the most likely scenario is in the future that either we just slowly make computers better, and then slowly they take over a larger fraction of the economy, or we have brain emulations. So brain emulations are intrinsically lumpy. So we haven't talked much about that. So remember I said One scenario is we take the software that's in individual human brains and we put that into computers. So that's a simulation process, an emulation process. So the age of M is about emulations. These emulations are lumpy in the sense that having a third of one isn't much use. If you have a model that's kind of good but still not good enough, it's worthless. What you need is to have a brain that works. So your brain, say if we put enough drugs in your brain, you'll just stop functioning, right? And your brain will be pretty useless. For an employer to want to hire you, you need to be basically conscious and competent and be able to use your brain to do stuff. That means you mostly need a functioning brain. So brain emulations are like that. They need it to work well enough or it's useless. So that's a threshold effect. At some point, we'll be able to make one that's good enough, and before that, we won't.
Interesting.
And that's a lump. That's a point at which suddenly one thing makes a big difference, because a brain emulation is naturally lumpy. So at the moment when we can not only make one, but they're cheap, i.e. we can swap them out for ordinary workers, now everything changes. So at the moment, we pay a lot for workers. Like most of the world economy is paid for workers. Yes, you pay some stuff for land. Yes, you pay some stuff for buildings or computers, but most of what we pay to do most everything is people.
Do we know a percentage?
Like 60, 70%. You know, most of what the world pays for stuff is people. That's why you're able to make money, right? You can have a job and be paid a lot because the world is just really desperate for people to do stuff, and it's willing to pay a lot because that's how stuff gets done. So eventually, if we can make a substitute for people, then everything changes, because now all of a sudden the people no longer get those wages, and now the machines get all those wages, and then the growth can go way up and change rapidly. And then my book, Age of M, is all about what changes.
And what the role of the human in that age?
Well, so the brain emulations,
we're getting to scary stuff,
right, are
for
very
us.
Human-like. So they will even think of themselves as human. So think about the transition from farming to industry, right? So imagine you were a subsistence farmer 500 years ago, and someone comes and tells you industry is coming. In the future, most people won't be doing what you're doing on this farming. They will be living in cities, driving cars, working in factories, going to offices. They will just have a whole different life in industry. You, as this farmer, your life is going to go away. And if you train your children to do this life you're doing, then you're training them in a thing that's going away. Now, you can have two reactions to that as a farmer from 500 years ago. One is to say,
fuck you.
Well, one is to say, people like me are going away. That's terrible. I want to stop this thing. I don't want this thing to happen, right?
Yeah.
Let's prevent it, because I want people like me to keep doing what I've been doing.
Yes.
Okay, that's one reaction. You may or may not succeed, but that's one approach, is to identify with what you've been doing and saying, that's me, and we need to keep that. And the other approach is to say, well, if the future is in cities, working in factories, driving cars, whatever, well, that's what I want my kids to do. I want to train my grandchildren whenever it's the right time to switch over to that world, to change our habits, where we live, what we do, how we train ourselves, to change whatever we need to change so that we can go be in that world and be winners in the new world. That's a whole different attitude, right? So in this future of brain emulations, we face that choice. That is, you could say, I don't want to be in that new world.
And it doesn't need to be on this brain emulation. It can be any different path.
Well,
with the
key
same
question is
mindset.
there a place for someone like me in that new world? That's the key question.
Yes.
Right? So some new worlds may have no place for someone like you. There's just nothing you could do to join that world, in which case you're just out of luck. It doesn't want you, right? But some of these worlds do have a place for something like you if you're willing to make enough changes to go adapt to it. So that's the world of brain emulations. The world of brain emulation says you could be a brain emulation. Your children could be a brain emulation. You could go join this world. You'll have to make a lot of changes. It won't be the same old world, but you could join this world, or at least a version of you could join this world. And will you choose to do so? Whereas like a strange enough alien AI future, those things are not things you could be. And so you can't really join that world. They aren't looking for you. They don't have a use for you.
What do you mean? An AI is alien?
So if the kind of robots, minds that show up in this new world are made out of computers made with very alien sort of algorithms like machine learning or something, then the thing it takes to make those things is a bunch of algorithms and computers, and that's not you. That is, it's not looking for your input. It's not looking for you. It doesn't want you. It wants those things. And so if the economy is based on those things, then those are the things that grow. Those are the things that world wants, and those are the things that would exist.
And what should be our perspective through that? Let evolution do its part, and if we need to be useless,
this is
let
a
it
fundamental value choice, and I can't tell you what to value. What I can tell
you... Oh my God, you are a very interesting guy. I love this.
But I can tell you,
you can't imagine how excited I get when I meet one so smart person.
Okay, but there are these different futures, and some of them have more of a place for people like you. And it would be natural for you to prefer that. It doesn't mean you'll be able to make that happen, but it doesn't mean you won't. So the Age of M, the brain emulation world, is a world that has more of a place, at least for a while, for things like you. That is, you and your children and grandchildren could become brain emulations and then be productive and valuable in that world. And that's one of the scenarios that might happen.
And we're talking now for me to be able to picture it. Let's say I put a Neuralink on my brain and I become one with the machine and I do completely different stuff that I'm doing now.
Well, actually that's actually not going to work very well. So what will work is to take a scan of your brain and just look at where all the cells are in your brain and then make a whole copy of that scan on a computer and just skip your brain. And in fact, initially, the cheapest, fastest ways to make scans of brains will be to destroy them in the process. Brain scans will initially be destructive. You will put a brain in the scanning machine and out will come the scan and no more brain. The brain will be gone.
Well, our brains will be useless.
They will just be, you will destroy a brain in the process of scanning it. And therefore, you'll be making a commitment that the future is the scan.
What if they make a mistake in the process of scanning? We're fucked.
Right. But so we do this, say, with books in libraries or something, right? You can have an old book in the library and you can scan the book and then throw away the book and keep the scan, right? But now you're making a bet that there wasn't something in the book you wanted that isn't in the scan, right? The question is, are you scanning enough to make sure you get what you wanted?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right.
But the scanners probably will be so.
This is also true for many companies with old files, right? They used to have paper files and then they scan them and then they throw away the paper.
And how much of a scan you need to be that person? You need the 99%, 80%,
It's again a value question. So notice you might not have noticed because you're young, but I've noticed, I'm old. You change over your lifetime. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago, and you won't be the same person in 50 years from now. You will just be different. And the question is, how much does that difference matter? 50 years from now, are you now dead? Because this person later, they descended from you, but they aren't you anymore. That's a value choice. And you'll face this choice over your life. You will be allowed to make changes, and you'll have to ask yourself, do I want to change myself? Do I want to change my career? Do I want to change my personality by, say, getting involved with a person with a different personality?
And you're saying this is value question.
Yes, it's a value question, how much you want to change and to allow yourself to change. And we have that question as a society, and each of us will have that
And what do you think is, so you can't say this is more right than the other one?
Right. But what I can do is predict what value choices will be made. I don't know which is the right value choice, but I do.
Because of game theory.
Because I just know what people are like and what they tend to do. And so I'm going to say, I know what values people tend to have, and I can use that to predict what they will do. I don't know if that's the right values for you to have. I just know what people tend to do. So I can predict the future in terms of knowing what people want, even if I don't know what they should want, right? So we said one of the things we have to do to predict what happens in the world is to know what people want.
The options and also what they don't know.
Right. Their options, their knowledge, and their preferences, their motivations. I know a lot of what actual motivations are. I can predict what motivations will be. I can't tell you if they're the right ones.
How did you got involved in all this shit? Not all this shit, all these crazy ideas. Like how you studied, what were paths you took in life to understand this stuff, and like by talking with other people, what was the most important contribution for your knowledge that you have?
So if you go to schools, go to libraries, go to talks, listen to podcasts, the world is full of people with topics they want you to listen to, which they think are important and interesting. And you have to make a choice. Which of all these things do you think are interesting and valuable to pursue? You only have one life and it all takes time, right? So most people just accept what other people say of what's interesting and they follow those. So they apply to a degree program and they get a degree in some school, and that's based on what that school thinks is important, right? Or there's a job offered and they want to hire you to talk about X, and so you do that job and you talk about X, right? And so most people inherit what the world around them has thought was interesting or important. One of the ways I'm weird, I admit I'm weird, is that I've done less of that, in the sense of I've done more of just trying to define for myself, what do I think is important? What do I think matters? What is promising? And then even if there isn't a job for that or a program for that or whatever else there is for that out there already for me to join, I still pursue what I think is important and interesting. That is the road less traveled, where you go different places than other people go if you hold yourself to your own standards of, yeah, but do I think this is interesting or important? So when I've thought about what's interesting or important, like the possibility that there might be a radical change in the economy, the possibility that might be based on robots, or radical changes in people, that there might be huge changes, these seem to me just really obviously important. And you know what? If you go look up that, almost nobody else seems to think it's important. That is, there's almost no discussion of it out there in the world. There's almost no journal articles, there are almost no books, there's almost no YouTube videos, there's just almost nothing about the possibility of these enormous changes. But I still think, yeah, but look, it's just really obviously important, isn't it? And then I just go do it, even if other people don't. So, I mean, it's a problem in the sense that usually we use the fact of what other people seem to be interested in as a clue to what is interesting, because, they've thought about it more than us, right? Usually when other people are neglecting something, it's because it's not a good thing. It's worth neglecting, right? People make mistakes, but mistakes are rare, right? So you can't just do the opposite of what everybody else does and have that be a good life plan.
Why? Maybe that's it.
No. If you just look at in random, in detail, it's no good, right? Randomly just doing the opposite of what everybody else does is just a very bad life plan. I'm sorry. It's just very bad in detail. But being selective and saying, okay, here's all the things people are doing now and what they think is interesting. And here's when I've thought about things, the things that seem interesting to me. And okay, there's some differences. Most of those differences I can explain as, okay, I'm wrong, they're right. But what if some of the differences are because I'm right and they're wrong? That's a risky gamble to put my life on one of those things, to put a lot of time and energy into those, because, well, what if I'm wrong and they're right? And so you just have to be very careful and somewhat, full of yourself, I guess, to be willing to pick and say, look, let's go back and look at it again, right? Okay, they might be right and I might be wrong. Let me go reconsider it. Let's just think it through again and again. Like, take these things and just try to find their point of view, see it as best I can from their point of view, just to say, well, maybe they're right. Let me see it as best I can that they're right. And if I just can't see that, I just say, no, this is just obviously important. Then I'm just going to go do that. So, I would say to you right now, I'd say, look, if you believe this sequence of past growth accelerations happened, then isn't it just obvious that it could happen again? And isn't it obvious that would be really important? I can't see how any way out around that, right?
Duh.
Well, but the world is saying no, right? The world is going, no, we're not interested. That's not interesting. Let's not talk about that. And I have to say, no, you're wrong. This has to be important. And so when I did that, then I picked one of them. I say, okay, well, let's pick one and analyze it. And I analyzed Age of M. So what had happened before, say, Age of M is that lots of people had in science fiction and other futurism talked about this idea of brain emulations. It's an old idea. It goes back to half a century at least, okay? It's not a new idea. But what people had said is, no one could know what would happen in that situation. It's impossible to predict what would happen in that situation. That's the usual advice people had said about something like brain emulations. Isn't that cool? Maybe you could write some science fiction stories about it, but sort of the vague impression you get from science fiction stories is just the best anybody could do. That's just it. And I said, what do you mean that's the best you can do? Like, I've learned all these fields, and I could just apply these fields to this one by one, slowly, one by one, and just build up a picture of what this world looks like. It's just obvious I can do that, right? And everybody was basically saying, no, this can't be done. And I said, well, let me show you that it can be done, and let me just do it. And that's what Age of M is. So my main priority in Age of M was just to take a scenario and show you in detail how you could walk through that scenario and take all the basic things we know about the world and just fill out a picture of that world. And I think I achieved that in Age of M. And that's my attempted proof to say, no, you guys are wrong. You can actually think about these things and you can figure them out. And I've tried to prove that that's possible. But I'm going up against everybody saying that that was impossible, right?
So what was some of the topics that so it seems that you learned a lot about history and economics, how this stuff, like what was some of the stuff that you really, really studied and like played fundamental role for you to have this stuff now?
So over time, I have been something of a polymath, I guess you'd call it. That is, I've slowly learned more and more fields. I didn't start out knowing many, many fields. I started out knowing fewer and slowly accumulated more. Now, most people who try to become intellectuals, the typical failing, the most common way they fail is not by failing to be smart enough, it's by failing to focus enough. So most people have the initial inclination that they want to study everything and think about everything. And that's what most party conversations are or whatever, right? People just talk about anything. And they like to read about anything. They'll read books about anything, newspaper articles about anything. And there's a lot of pretty smart people out there like that who just like to talk about anything. But they can't make a career out of being intellectual that way. They need to focus. To be intellectual, you need to focus. But then most people who manage to focus on intellectual, they pick a focus and that's where they stay. They'll still their whole career with that focus. Now, in their free time, they'll talk about other things, but they're kind of doing that in the same mode all the non-intellectuals do, right? Just sort of a party conversation, speculation about all the other stuff, right? But then they have their specialty. They're a physicist, they're an economist, whatever, and they have their very special thing, right? Now, some people, like me, manage just barely to make ourselves focus enough to get a job as an intellectual or something, but
which is teaching in the university,
for example, or at a think tank, or there's a number of ways to be a professional intellectual. But we manage to squeak by and become a professional intellectual, but then as soon as we have the opportunity, we start going into other fields. But now if we just did that in the way all amateur intellectuals do it, that wouldn't go very well. We'd just be in our leisure time doing stuff. So the key difference is to go into new fields as if it was going to be your specialty field and to hold yourself to the standard of, I'm going to learn enough about this thing to contribute in the way that another professional intellectual would. See, that's a key standard difference, right?
That's interesting.
Okay, so you learn field A, and you're an expert in A, and then you're tempted to go over to B, but you don't just like read some articles about B and do some party conversation about it. You get into B enough that you can do
and also
for
you
B
have the right
motivation
for B.
Well, you have to be good enough at B. That is, this is the key. Hold yourself to the standard of, if I'm going to get into B, I'm going to learn it enough and do it well enough that I can contribute to B. And sort of for an academic, the standard is, can I publish on B? Could I write a paper on B on something that's novel and interesting, submit it to a journal on B and have them accept it? And if so, you know what? Now I'm an expert on B. And a polymath, in my mind, is someone who does that for more and more fields. They learn those fields well enough to contribute.
So what are your fields?
So I started out in engineering and switched to physics. And then from physics, I got a master's in philosophy of science and then a master's in physics. And I did 9 years of computer research. And so in computer research, I published. And then along the line, I've done some physics publications to reify my expertise in physics. And then after 9 years of computer research, I went back to school to get my PhD in social science, where I learned political science and economics roughly similarly. And I went on the job market, and then I got a postdoc in health policy. And after 2 years, I went and got my job here in economics.
So you try to hold yourself in that
so I have
standard in every field that you.
And then once I got my tenure in economics, I allowed myself to stretch out a little more, and I've written a book on futurism and a book on psychology. It's classified as psychology, which is the elephant in the brain, hidden motives in everyday life. Recently, I've done some publications in astrophysics, thinking about aliens. And now I know well enough how to judge if I could publish in a field, even if I don't. That is, but the standard is, could I publish?
And how do you know?
Well, because I've just seen how this goes over and over again. Like, I see what it is
to
publish.
So you see yourself, do I know enough, and you understand by talking with other people? And
can I make original contributions? So that's the standard. Can I contribute to this field? Can I expand this field? That's the real test of do I understand
And you choose fields random?
No, I choose the ones that I think seem the most important at the time. So that is, I often switch fields when I say, okay, I understand this one, but now that I understand this, there's only so much you can do with it. This other field looks like where all the interesting stuff is. Let's go learn about that. And so I've been trying to use the standard of what's actually interesting, what's actually important, and use that to look at allowing myself to go into each new field. So as an example, in the last few months, my most recent venture has been the sacred.
The sacred.
The sacred.
What is this?
That's a thing people do. That is, people often treat things as sacred. People often treat things differently when they treat it as sacred. And I wanted to understand that.
What sacred means?
Well, religion has long been seen as sacred, but when sociology,
something very special to you,
and that you treat in a very special way. So the first thing is just to collect what are the correlates of the sacred?
You're a psychopath.
Well, because basically, the sacred has been in my way a lot. There's a lot of things I wanted to do in the world, and people said, no, you can't do that because that's sacred. And I said, let's just figure this thing out. Okay. And so in the last few months, I decided, okay, let's go read what I need to read about the subject, what experts have said, try to collect what the data is, what do we know about how people tend to treat things differently when they treat them as sacred, and make a long list of that, and then do what I do as a social science theorist to say, what's our best explanations for that? And I came up with a new explanation that I think is a original contribution to an understanding the sacred. And even if I haven't published it in the sort of academic journals, by now I know enough about publication in academia to know how I could tell if something was worthy of publication. Academics usually exclude outsiders by having a lot of extra requirements. That is, you have to write the way they write and cite the things they cite and sort of be one of them. And so, there are obstacles to publishing in most academic fields by whether you're really one of them. Now, that didn't prevent me from publishing in astrophysics in the last few years, because I learned enough about how they write and what they talk about to write in their style and talk about it to publish in astrophysics. So that's, again, I've recently shown that I can meet the standard. But for the sacred lately, I haven't done that yet. I haven't published it in a journal that would publish stuff on the sacred or whatever. But I can see that I've made an original contribution, and that's the standard I hold myself to. I'm not going to go into a new area unless I can go into it deep enough to understand it well enough to actually add to it. And that's what I think I've done lately about the sacred. But that's just an example of what I've done in the last few months. And it's the example of the whole intellectual strategy of, if you want to do multiple fields, fine, but hold yourself to the standard of, for each field you do it well enough to add to it.
It intrigued me a bit, the sacred that you're saying. Can you tell me a bit more?
I can tell you a lot more.
Yes.
That's what I've been thinking about the last few months. Okay. So the first thing is to say, we treat sacred things differently. It's not just religion, right? So religion used to suck up a lot of the sacred several centuries ago. Almost all sacred things were somehow connected and tied into religion. But religion has greatly declined, and so the sacred energies have spread out across lots of different things. Like, we treat democracy as sacred. We treat love as sacred. We treat medicine as sacred. We treat nature as sacred. And by saying we treat these as sacred, there's similar ways we treat all these things. And that's the key thing, is there is this way we treat some things as sacred.
Yes.
And the first challenge is to just list, what do we do different about sacred things? What is, in fact, how we treat sacred things differently? So I have a paper, I've summarized this, where I basically have at the moment roughly 50 correlates of the sacred, 50 different things we treat sacred. But I can summarize them. I've collected them together into themes, and so I can summarize them for you, right? So one thing is, sacred things are highly valued, right? They're not
by us, not by
by
everyone.
us. We value sacred things highly, right? And we
How highly?
Pretty high, or really low. Like evil is sacred in a certain sense, but it's really valued very low. Let's say we value nature really high, right? We value medicine very high. We value democracy very high. That is, we are willing to pay lots of costs to things. So another thing we do,
Willing to pay a lot of cost.
so sacrifice is something we like to do for sacred things. We not only are willing
So
to
this is
sacrifice,
how
we're
we
sometimes
judge.
eager to sacrifice.
This is how we judge how secret.
Where we show ourselves how sacred something is by how much we sacrifice for it. So one thing is that we value the sacred, but the second thing we notice is we like to show our value for the sacred. We like to go out of our way to let other people know that we value the sacred. So often it has strong emotional impact on us, and our emotions show, and we show other people that we value it differently.
How do we show?
Well, the word awe is often an emotion that goes along with the sacred. It induces a feeling of awe in you, joy, or just out of body experience. When experience is sacred, it's unusual. It's transcendent, right? It's just not like usual stuff, and it's really extraordinarily different. That's how we describe our experience of the sacred often. So again, that's a way of showing that we value it. And we'd like to show, and we like to sacrifice for showing that we value the sacred. So, and a third thing is that we often bind together as groups via our shared sense of the sacred. We often have rituals by which we together show that we value something, like a funeral or a wedding, where what we do is part of that.
What do you have as a secret?
What do I have? Well,
Yeah.
that's a separate discussion, but we can get to that. But here I'm just trying to analyze it. But I have to admit, we all have some things we treat as sacred. So one of the first things you'll notice is, don't tell me you don't have something that's sacred. You do.
My one is learning.
That's a fine thing, and we can go into more detail. But there's more detail to say about learning. That is, but yes, education and learning is often treated as sacred. I agree, and it's one of the common things. But now that you notice how do I treat learning differently when I treat it as sacred? You'll notice you have a different attitude toward it. There's a stance, right?
Yes. Now I'm skeptical. Are you going to offend my
No,
learning?
no. But
No.
I
This
don't-
is no.
right. But it's one of the stances you have. You're
Yes,
worried about
yes,
people offending.
I worry about
Right.
this, So
Because
it's
once it's
interesting.
sacred, you think, is somebody going to pollute my sacred?
Yeah,
Are they
yeah.
going to shit all over it?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because you don't want to let that happen. Your sacred is the precious thing you're trying to protect. That's one of the ways you value it, right?
Can you be a human without any secrets? Not possible.
Probably not. That is, it's just, there's all sorts of weird humans. who have all
Even
sorts
if you are a human that doesn't put any value to any secret stuff, then that is your secret thing.
Well, I don't know if that would make it sacred, but like there are supposedly people who are like psychopaths who can pretend to have many of the feelings that other people don't have. I don't know. I don't really know, but we're listing correlates of the sacred. So remember, we said you value it highly. You show that you value it highly through your emotions and sacrifice. You bind together as groups often through a shared sense. So one of the things that makes you feel tied to people from your ethnicity or culture or nation is the idea that they value the same things as you. And that's one of the things that makes you feel tied to them and bound to them and willing to help them is that they value the same thing. And if you find that they don't value the same things as you, that will make distance between you and them.
So this is how we're going to create communities in the future with people that have the same secret things. How is it secret, right?
Say again?
What is the word? Sacred?
Sacred.
Sacred.
S-A-C-R-E-D. Sacred.
Yes. Sacred.
But we have more correlates. So another correlate is the sacred is set apart. That is, we like there to be a clear distinction between sacred things and not sacred things so that the profane things don't pollute the sacred. We don't like them mixed up with each other. We don't even like to make trade-offs between, sacred and profane things. Like sacred things shouldn't be bought with money, right? Because money is profane, and then you'd be making a trade-off between one and the other. And you don't want to mix them up. So in many ways, the sacred needs to be set apart and clearly distinguished between one versus the other. Like even sometimes people clearly distinguish art from craft, right? Craft might look pretty, but it's not art. And art is clearly demarcated things that are useless, and therefore they're art or something. Okay, so art is often sacred. Okay, in addition to being set apart, it is often intuited. That is, one of the concepts is that with respect to sacred things, you're not supposed to be calculating them so much with numbers or some formula. You're supposed to be intuiting their value and intuiting the right things to do about them. You can more trust your intuitions about the sacred. It won't mislead you. Appearances are less misleading. The sacred should be intuited, not thing. And then, now I'm blanking.
Yes, one of the lights closed.
And then another thing about the sacred, maybe I'll remember, is that often when we have abstract sacred things like love, and then, or even a nation, and then when we have a concrete thing associated with that abstract thing, this concrete thing becomes sacred. Like a flag becomes sacred by association with a nation, or a love letter becomes sacred by association with a love.
So a lot of things, even ideas, even things in a personal life, even physical thing can become sacred.
Right. So that's an interesting fact about the sacred. It's not just abstract things, but often concrete things become sacred by connection with the abstract.
And you said that this comes back to what we were talking about, game theory, that is the motivation,
right?
Of people. This is usually a big.
So there's this package of motivation around sacred things, and the challenge is to understand it, right? So remember, this was in my way.
If you get to understand this, maybe you are going to understand humans deeply. So
yes, because this seems to be an important thing about humans, is they treat some things as sacred. So if we don't understand this, then we won't understand a lot of things people are doing.
Oh, you can make a lot of money by tricking people.
Maybe, or
about their sacred.
Or you could just find meaning yourself, right?
What do you mean? Oh, yeah.
You could find your own sacred and understand what you're doing, and maybe do it better.
Yes.
Okay, so this is all data. What I've been saying before isn't a theory of it. It's just data. It's just like some patterns in
that
what we see about the sacred. Then what we want is a theory that explains these patterns. So that's what I've been trying to do, is to come up with a theory to explain these. So I start with a theory that was, long known, famously described by Emil Durkheim. Durkheim was like a founder of the field of sociology, like over a century ago. He basically said the essence of religion is the sacred. And he said the essence of the sacred is people binding together over a shared vision of the sacred. That is, the sacred was about binding communities together, getting groups of people to be together on the basis of a shared view of the sacred. That was his concept. And that explains the first three of those correlates, right? It explains why you would value it highly, why you'd want to show that you value it, and why, in fact, groups would be bound together. But it doesn't so well explain the other correlates. Why would you set apart the sacred? The other one was idealize. We idealize the sacred. We simplify the sacred. So sacred things have fewer flaws, fewer faults, fewer subcategories. Sacred things are simplified in our minds in an essential way.
Yeah.
Okay. So why would we idealize? Why would we set apart? Why would we think, not feel, or feel, not think the sacred? And why would they, make concrete examples become sacred as well? Those are not explained by the simple Durkheim theory that it's there to bind groups together. And that's what I came up with as a better explanation for those other correlates. So to explain that theory, what I need to do is tell you about construal level theory, because this is a classic theory of psychology in the last few decades. It's a whole separate thing. It has nothing to do with the sacred initially, but it's a key thing that I've used to help think about things. So your brain, all of our brains, are organized in substantial part by abstraction. what happens is, say, what you see when you have a visual scene is first layer in your brain takes very close correlations of like, is there a line here? What color is this patch? And it computes very local things. And then as you go back to deeper layers in your brain, it's making larger scale judgments at higher levels of abstraction about what you're seeing. And then you have some high levels of your brain where you make some key choices. And then you send instructions down to do particular actions with your voice or your hands. And those start being abstract, like what word am I going to say? And they end up being very specific. How is my tongue going to move here in this particular way? And so, again, moving down through layers of abstraction, starting from very abstract things to very particular
and
detailed
there is
things.
a big difference from the idea to,
yes, exactly.
actually
and it takes a lot of layers to make that mapping down to the specifics. So your brain is organized by layers of abstraction, from specific to abstract.
That's
okay?
interesting.
So construal level theory isn't based on what we know about brain organs. It just says we notice that people's reasoning depends a lot on whether they're reasoning abstractly or concretely, and that this is a fundamental category of our reasoning. And the key idea is, so when you're looking at a scene like me, you see a few big things up close, like me, and then in the background, say there's bricks behind me, and you see a lot of little things, bricks. The key idea is these bricks you reason about differently than you reason about the big things up close. The bricks you reason about more abstractly because you're throwing away most of their detail. In your mind, the bricks are rectangular, they're brown, they're oriented a certain way, and after that, you don't actually notice much. You reason about them abstractly, and this is fundamentally how you do lots of things. So when you some things that you see or think about, you think about as if from a distance, and the things you see from a distance, you're thinking about not very carefully, not in much detail, and you're only knowing a few brief descriptors about them, and you're reasoning about those quickly because they don't matter very much. And then there's a few big things up close, like me or the microphone, that you have a detailed description of, and you reason about them in detail using those details, and you're willing to put a fair bit of effort into that. And that's construal level theory says not only is that true about spatial distance, things close to you and far away in space, it's true about time. Things far away in time are reasoned more abstractly. Things far away in social distance. Things far away in chance, because
so everything around us goes to a layer of
everything around you either is seen as far away or near to you, and you reason about it differently, whether it's far away or near. And there's a continuum
or is
between.
seen or is not seen. It's
Felt,
just
even however you reason about it, it has to be categorized as near versus far.
I'm confused with near and far.
So again, me and the mic is near, and the bricks behind me are far.
Yes.
And you have different mode of reasoning about those two things. And now everything you reason about it either in a near or a far away.
Okay.
So that's true about times, near in time, far away in time. It's true about people and social distance. Some people are very far away from you. Some people are close.
So time, what do you mean by time? Like, what's the difference that I reason you and the bricks with time?
But I might ask about your plans for tomorrow or your plans for next year.
Okay.
And if I ask about your plans for next year, you'll move into more of a far mode in thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I ask about your plans this afternoon, say, you will have more of a near mode about that. Mm-hmm. Okay. If I have a scenario that's hypothetical, if it's very unlikely, that's more of a far scenario. And if it's very likely, it's more of a near scenario. And also, if you make plans, your plans tend to have high-level goals, and they have many concrete constraints. And the high-level goals you think about in a far mode, and the concrete constraints you think about in a near mode. So all of your different reasoning about everything is broken down fundamentally into whether it's near versus far, and that affects how you reason about things. That is construal level theory. And it affects all sorts of things, like the color blue
so you basically
is far.
Took this theory and you're trying to apply.
Right. I'm going to use this theory to explain the sacred, but first I'm explaining this theory. So this theory so far has nothing to do with the sacred. It just says we have these two different modes and a continuum in between. We see some things near, some things far, and we have a lot of correlates between these two things. And a key thing to notice here is far things we don't reason about very carefully. We don't look at their details so much. We quickly look at a few basic features of them, draw some quick conclusions, and go on because they don't matter very much. Okay. Now, let's think about two people in a group who want to see something the same way, like medicine. They want medicine to be sacred. So they want to see it the same. They want to agree about how they see medicine. But what if one of them is seeing medicine from up close, i.e. they have a difficult medical condition and somebody else is seeing it from far away, i.e. somebody that hardly know. Now, this habit of seeing things differently near versus far becomes an obstacle.
Do they have different perceptions about it?
Because everything is different near versus far. That's the whole point. Near versus far is this fundamental category in our minds that makes us see things differently depending on whether it's near versus far. So that difference is an obstacle.
So my father is a priest.
Yes.
So he has a near experience with God than just a regular person.
Well, he never actually sees God, but he certainly has a nearer experience with like the communion, right? Or with the church building, right? There are many aspects of the religious world that he sees more nearly than other people do, right? Or a doctor certainly will see medicine more nearly than a patient will, say. Mm-hmm. But the key point is this difference of near versus far is an obstacle to the sacred. Because remember, if the key point of the sacred is to see something the same in order to bind together as a group, then seeing it differently becomes an obstacle. So my theory is the following, that we label some things as sacred, i.e. as the things we want to bind together as a group about. And when we make that label, we then, in our minds, switch to seeing it from afar, even when it's near.
Just to fit in the group?
So that we can see it the same together. So consider the example of sex versus love, right? Now, to some degree, sex is sacred, but it's less sacred than love. Okay? That is, people close up in sex, they see it differently than people far away.
Yes.
It's one of the most obvious things you notice about sex. When you're in the moment, it feels and notices very different than when you think about it from a distance far away.
Yes.
It's just completely different, right? Therefore, you're seeing it differently near versus far, right? And that causes disagreements. Many people disagree about who should have sex with who on the basis of seeing it differently near versus far, right? And that's an obstacle to people treating sex as sacred.
We both agree when we talk about it.
If we're both seeing it from a distance, we might both be able to agree. Yeah, but if say I'm talking to you about your sex and that I'm not in, that happened yesterday, the way you felt about it yesterday then would be very different than how I think about it today, talking with you about it, because it's
But how do we bond as a group?
But what we do is...
Let's put the example of sex.
So, but the way we do is we instead make love sacred. Love is near sex, but it's not quite the same thing, right? We make love sacred, and then we say sex is okay if it's serving love. How do we make love sacred? Well, for love, what we do is we all try to see it as if from afar, even if we're close to it. So in fact, many people find it hard to know if they're in love.
Yes.
They find it hard to label that category about themselves. They don't know if they're in love.
Yes.
They say, I'm not sure if I'm in love. And then people often say, I don't really understand love. Love is sort of mysterious.
One of my girlfriends was so offended that I told her that I'm not sure if I'm in love with you because I don't know what love is.
Right, but isn't that remarkable? That is, people who are basically in love a lot don't know what it is. That's what it looks like to see something from afar, you see.
To know that, yes.
Okay.
So they are not in love if they are looking it for far.
No, from afar is how we always see it, whether we're in love or not. The point is, what we all agree is love is great, you see. What we don't agree is any particular case of whether it is love.
Yes.
But in order to all agree that love is great, whatever it is, we have to see it from afar in a way that we aren't paying attention to its details. That's how we see it together as the same. Similarly, like a medical patient, often, what they do is they just decide to trust the doctor and not think about it, right? Yes. And now they can see it the same as somebody else from afar who also just wants to trust the doctor and not think about it, because they've set aside all the detail they see and say, I'm not going to look at those details. Yes. I'm just going to trust the doctor and believe in medicine.
But is there, so how, using all this stuff that you learn, how can I know that I'm in love? Where
I was just checking the time.
Yeah, we'll have another 10 minutes.
Okay, great.
So,
well, that's the whole point. Because you see it from afar, it'll be harder to know. So let's take democracy, right? We all agree democracy is great, right? If we look at any one country with any one election, do we know if that's a democracy? Well, no, we don't. We aren't so sure. what it takes to be a democracy. How many parties do there have to be? How much free press does there have to be? How much competition does there need to be a democracy? How much control does the government or the military have over the society? All those things can vary a lot. And we could look at that and go, well, I don't know if that's the democracy. Why? Because once we see democracy the same together, we hold most onto this abstract concept, and then we're not so sure how it applies to any one case. That's part of the cost of seeing something as sacred, is not being able to see the details as well. And so that explains these other correlates, is my claim. We can understand these other correlates of the sacred from this fundamental principle that sacred is things we choose to see the same by seeing them as if from afar, even when they're near. And it has costs, is one of the key things to notice, okay? By seeing something as sacred, you won't do as well regarding that thing. We don't do as well with respect to medicine because we see it as sacred. Maybe we don't even do as well with respect to love because we see it as sacred.
Oh, so I'm not doing great in education because I see it as sacred.
Like, you won't be as good at figuring out what education to do exactly how if you see education as sacred, because you will see it as if from afar. You're seeing it, this abstract ideal of education, and you're trying to map that onto the concrete things in front of you.
That's interesting.
You don't know how to think about it concretely so well because you are seeing it as sacred. But seeing it as sacred does motivate you more toward it.
Yes.
You will have more energy.
So which one
and
is
devotion.
better?
Well, you have to see the trade-off. But another key thing is to see it's not just groups of people who are bound together by the sacred. It's a person across time. That is, you across time will see yourself as more the same person through the things you see as sacred across time. So if you've always seen learning as sacred, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, you will still see learning as sacred. And that will make you feel more like you're the same person across time.
Oh, but you are completely different people.
You're very different, but you will still see yourself more the same. You will be bound together internally by this sense of that you always across time saw learning as sacred. And this is a unifying fact about you that makes you the same person across time. Even though for you, learning will be very different 50 years from now. You will still be learning, but it will be a very different kind of learning in a very different style, in a very different context. Why is it the same thing? Because you decided it was the same thing. You declared it so as the sacred learning.
So how old are you?
I'm 63.
Oh, wow. So I'm curious to see, what do you have any wishes to live, to do in this world, or to leave behind in this world? Do you think about you?
Well, I'm doing it. Like, it is, to me, this sort of inquiry is sacred. This is the best thing I or anyone could do, in my view.
What?
To figure stuff out that's important. I mean, I'm 63-year-old. You might think I'm past my prime and I should just be like cleaning up stuff and like preparing to die or whatever. But I say, no, I can take on the most important topics and make progress on the most important topics. I can help us understand them when we didn't understand them before. And I can still do that.
So this is what you want, like, your legacy to be able to...
I will have added to our understanding on important topics. That is what I aspire to do, and what by now I think I have actually done, and I'm trying to continue to do. That's it.
And that involves also communicating to the public the stuff that you found?
Well, of course.
Or
I mean, it won't help for me to understand it if I can't pass it on. The goal is, as a community, we all will learn to understand more, because many people like me will do what I'm doing and trying to figure things out and then tell other people in a way that persuades them that, in fact, something's been figured out.
So what do you learn when you try to explain it to the public? You refine your theories, you get questions, like what is the...
Well, I mean, the basic fact about thinking is that when you think in your own head, it's just hard to translate that to other people's heads. So at least half of useful thinking is trying to figure out how you could say it in a way that other people would get it.
Useful.
It's not very useful if you just can say it in your own head to yourself, but you can't explain it to anybody else. It'll die with you. So I would like, anytime I understand anything, to find a way to be able to say it in a way that other people could get it, and then they could build on it. That is, if other people like my ideas and they nod and they just think that's nice, but then they forget it and everybody forgets it, it'll be lost. So I need somebody to get it in a way that they build on it. And then it becomes part of the accumulation of what we all know.
Well, I'm sure I will build on the stuff that you said about the economy. Not sure if I will build on the stuff that you said about the secret stuff. Maybe some ideas about that, but I'm sure
But you might describe it to somebody else who might build on it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's
it.
Many paths by which something could eventually get built on.
Yes.
And we might have viewers here, and one of them might think about it and build on it, or tell someone else who might build on it. But the goal is that we can all accumulate, that we could all learn more together over time.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for this conversation. That was the best day of my life. I love you. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right.